today is going to be a lot more, or this session is definitely going to be COVID focused. But as we're doing that, please be present. There's going to be a lot of important conversations, a lot of important information. The more we're focused, the less we'll have to repeat in this session, and the more we can get through, more questions and everything else. Assume positive intent and communicate respectfully. There's going to be opportunities for discussion and input and sharing ideas of how things might be addressed. Assume that everybody's approaching it with the best intentions, and we'll communicate respectfully. There might be disagreements, but make sure we're communicating that respect. The agenda for today, we are going to talk about teaching and instruction. We're going to talk about how IEPs will be changed, and we'll talk about some group-specific needs with the secondary resource teachers. But first of all, I know that there's a lot of questions about leave and some of the things around HR. And so we're going to start with that, just to get that out of the way, and then we'll jump into what we're going to be doing for kids and how we communicate that. With our leave, from the presentation. In addition to the original leaves that you have, personal leave, sick leave, all of that is still the same. But there are 4 new leave types that are created off of the FFCLA, which is all around COVID leaves. And they created 4 new ones. There's COVID work exposure, non-work exposure, dependent childcare, and dependent quarantine. And in the kickoff documents, there's a leave chart. And I'm going to be showing you some clippings from that chart, but that chart has all the different scenarios of if this happens, this is what needs to happen. The district is going to have a COVID leave person identified at HR. So if in the morning you think you need to take COVID leave, you can call in and talk to them, put it in the front line also if you need to. But if you have any specific questions in the morning, like, hey, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I think this happened, and not even necessarily in the morning, but anytime, like, hey, my spouse has to quarantine. They're not sick, but they have to quarantine. What does that mean for me? Call HR. There's going to be a point of contact at HR that you can call and talk through that scenario. That way everybody's getting the same answers, and they're going to know the rules of this inside and out, and so hopefully you guys can get consistent information. Around our leave will need to be entered into Frontline. Big thing for paras is making sure that they have access to their email this year and making sure they have access to Frontline and know how to get into it. We are going to be getting some information sheets to help paras and all staff be able to access Frontline, know what to do, how to use it, both on the computer side, which that's where I usually do it, but it also has a phone system where you can call in and enter your leave that way. And so I'm not sure what's going on. Is it everybody having that issue? Harder to hear me? Yes? Okay, I'm sorry. Let me switch to something.
There, is that better? Oh, I'm sorry for anybody who was in 2 sessions before me, or the last 2 sessions. Nobody said anything except for now, so hopefully it was just, I had reset my computer, so hopefully that was all that the issue was. Okay, I am so sorry for that. But so with Frontline, we're getting some information so that paras will know how to access it. And then we will get all of that outlined. The only thing is for paras that are 18 hours and under, they'll just have to mark their COVID leave on their timesheet because those paras aren't put into Frontline for some reason. That's an HR thing, not my thing. And so, but they would still have access to call that person, that point of contact, if they have questions. So, okay, but the different types of leave, just going to run through these are the different scenarios that would mean you have to take, or not you have to, but they would be eligible to take COVID work exposure leave. This is at full pay, and this is at no limit. So if you have to test positive for COVID because of a school or work-related connection, and then you have to quarantine later, and then you have to quarantine again, all of you don't run out of it. It just, you keep getting paid at your full rate because it was work exposure. For non-work exposure, it's full pay for 2 weeks up to 80 hours, and then you move into sick or unpaid leave. The one big question is, well, what if we don't know? Because that's going to be a scenario. if we truly cannot figure out which way it is, then we're going to lean towards work exposure. We're going to err that direction instead of the other way. If though, like it's clear you got it during Christmas break when we weren't in school, then that's just, even if you don't know exactly where you got it, that reasonableness will prevail in that. But for the most part, we'll lean towards that. These different scenarios, like I say, are all outlined in that chart, as well as a couple other scenarios that where, like there's one where even if my wife is home and has to quarantine, what am I supposed to do? As long as because when county health contacts you about this stuff, they'll give you information of what you and anybody in your family needs to do. If they say it's okay for you to go to work, then it's okay from our perspective for you to go to work. So it's all going to be dictated by those processes. So those are the two different types that affect just the employee if you are impacted by it. The other two are dependent leaves. One is dependent childcare, and that's where if your childcare provider has to close for COVID reasons, then you have this. You can also use sick leave in this scenario if you choose to do that, or if you run out of this. This is at 2/3 pay, and that's where you can also supplement where you're doing this leave and you're using a little bit of your sick leave to fill in the rest of that time. This is a very similar to FMLA for anybody that might have used that for maternity leaves or long-term health needs that you're out. And then dependent quarantine, this is where when your dependent has to quarantine and the scenarios for that. I'm not an expert on leave by any means, and so there will be, I'm sure there'll be questions, there'll be issues. If you're in a Hayes school, there will be another leave presentation in your school, and for more opportunities for questions. But if you have a specific scenario that you're envisioning, like, hey, if this happens, what does that mean for me? Let me know, and I can get you connected with HR. They will have a much clearer and much more precise answer than I will. Like everything I have is kind of like, if it's not on the chart, I don't really know what to tell you. So, but they have everything else. I mean, I can probably reason it, but it's going to be, might be a little bit of more of a guess. I'd rather just send you to them and make sure you get the right answer. So that's how leave is going to look. And then the other thing around HR and time off is subs. And subs are definitely going to be difficult this year, not just because we might have more adults out that need subs, but also we don't have the same level or the same number of subs that we've had in the past. A lot of our subs that are retirees, they're choosing not to do it this year. And so one thing that we can do, like the actual process for getting subs is going to be the same. There is one scenario that the district is looking at. They haven't pulled the trigger on it yet, that Hayes is looking at. I don't know about the outlying districts, but that Hayes is looking at hiring 3 to 4 permanent subs essentially for the school year, where they can float to where they're needed, just so we have at least a few that we know we can rely on. But in that other sub pool, if you know anybody who would qualify for an emergency sub license or meets any of the other criteria for that, you can have them contact HR or fill out the application, refer them to get them on that list. Where anybody and everybody is going to be needed this year. And so if you know people that you think would be good in that position or are interested in that position, sometimes people don't realize that, if you have 60 semester hours of college credit, you can qualify it for an emergency sub license and be able to do that in your community. So I'm sure you'll see a lot of education around that around the district. Up at Fort Hayes, we shared that with the teacher ed department as well, because as some of them are in online programs, there's some that are interested in doing subbing even for short-term periods. So any questions? The other thing around HR and logistics, we don't expect you to have to waterfall or regurgitate all of this to your paras. They're going to have questions for you, and you can definitely answer them, but we don't expect you to have to answer all of this. We do have a couple sessions we're going to be having available for paras to get on and talk about the different things at the different in-services. They'll be there, of course, for those conversations too. But next Tuesday and next Wednesday, we have a couple sessions there that will be available. We'll be sending the links out. One thing, we know that not all of the paras have, or not all of them check their email. some of the new ones that have been hired, they may not have their email set up yet because they set up email when they go to onboarding with Bonnie Abel. But some of them haven't been on there yet or haven't been in to do the onboarding yet. So if we send it to you, please let them know about it as well. Find a way to get it to them. We're trying to share with as many as we can and how we can, but we just know that not all, some of them rely on a text message from you to even know there's something there to check. And so if you can help us get that, let them know that this is happening, that would be great. We'll try and find different ways to communicate it as well. But again, this is just we want to make sure that everybody is able to get the questions answered that they have, no matter what. So, any questions around leave, subs, or HR in general with this? COVID's definitely going to be different, but. Okay.
Hi, Kyle.
Yes, Kelly.
It would be nice if you would maybe go through this with our paras. Turn that. I think it would be appropriate for somebody to go through that with the paras.
Oh. Yes, and that's what this meeting or these sessions here will be for them that they can get on and we can go over it with as they get on. But then the district is also at each district in-service, like the district in-service this year in Hayes is going to be building based. And so there's going to be leave presentations in all of those where the paras will be at. So yes, so all of that will be addressed. Thank you.
So will the paras they know to come to these two meetings?
No, that's where we're gonna email it to as many as we have emails for, but we're also gonna send it to you guys and rely on you to help get that information. Let them know that there's these sessions going on, that to check their email or forward the email if they didn't get it. Help get them where they know that this is happening. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, we'll do everything we can, but we just know that some either they don't check their email for one reason or another, especially not during the school year, and so we'll just try and get it as best we can.
This will be during their contact time. They'll get paid to do this.
I'm not sure. Depends on the year. For this one, I don't know if it's during the in-service days. Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure how we'll handle these, but because these aren't required, these are just as like if you have questions, be able to come on. So.
Oh, okay.
This is elective. So.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to talking more about the instructional side of things. I wanted to make sure that we had some time to talk about the different phases to help clarify this a little bit. The phases, and in special education, it's going to be kind of confusing because we're going to talk about the phases from two different perspectives. The phases for this at the school and district level are talking about the phase for the collective group. Like the whole school is in on-site, the whole school is in hybrid. When we're talking about it from an individual student on an IEP or in the contingency plans, we're talking about it for that one kid. The definitions are still the same, but we're talking about it at different levels of the student versus the whole group. And I'm going to try and help kind of explain that throughout this, but just recognize that we thought about using different terminology for students versus the groups, but that was going to be more complicated than it needed to be because the definitions are still the same. In on-site, that means everything is happening on-site, like everything is happening in a school building. In hybrid, that means some of it is happening in school, some of it is happening at home. And then remote means everything's happening at home. Remote is also confusing because not only do we have remote in this scenario, this is where everybody started coming to school and they end up in remote because of health needs. There's a quarantine in that classroom or that building. There is a school-wide shutdown or a district-wide shutdown, and they had to go to remote. Parent choice remote, those are those parents that because of health concerns in the family, health concerns for the kid, a desire to have a consistent program for their kid if they're concerned about us having to jump back and forth between hybrid and on-site or remote and on-site. They just want something consistent that they can predict. Some of them may have chosen this. Parent choice remote is going, at least in Hayes, is going to look a lot different than remote here because remote here is going to be handled as, kind of like continuous learning did last year where the same teachers are providing that. In Parent Choice Remote, in Hayes, they're going to have, well, I guess that, never mind, that's elementary. So secondary is actually going to be very similar to this one, where it's going to be, each building is going to have a little bit different way of how it looks. The thing is, the difference between this remote and this remote is that here we might still have some targeted IEP time where they're coming to the school. That's something that this remote has an option for, that most kids in remote don't have if they're on an IEP. The superintendents have all agreed, like, if the IEP can dictate. So we have a parent that chose to do remote, but we as an IEP team, and they think, you know, a 30-minute individual session with a teacher to get them recentered, I think that could work, and I'm comfortable with that. We can add that to their hybrid plan, and that's fine. The average, you know, if we just have a gen ed kid who chose Parent Choice Remote, they may not have that option of coming up to the school for that kind of a session. Some might, but with the IEP, we definitely do have that. So these are the different phases if we're for the typical, those that start on site, and then we have to move between depending on health conditions. This is Parent Choice Remote. Each district kind of has different rules on how kids can choose between Parent Choice and the regular process. Hayes, for example, is going to allow kids to move at least once. So if they get 5 days into Parent Choice Remote and they're like, oh, this is not working, I want to come back, they can. And so they may not get the same classes that they were originally going to take, but they, like, from an elective point of view, it'll be like a kid moving in from out of district in many ways. So that's from that, you know, when you hear your principal, your superintendents talking about the phases, this is how they're going to be talking about it mostly. When we're talking about it from the contingency plans, we're talking about it from the student level. And so we might have where a building goes remote as a building, and most kids are being educated at home. But we've got some kids that we invite in for hybrid sessions. And so that student is on a hybrid, even though the building is on a remote. And so that's why they have to, that's why it's going to get a little confusing at different points. So again, it's still the same, all education in school, some remote, or all remote. But it's all about the student, not the group. Is that clear enough? I mean, I know it's going to be confusing, but especially when you're talking to other people about it, but in your mind, does that kind of make sense as we're talking about these plans? Okay. The one thing that we will need to do, the contingency plans are different than the ICLPs we did in the spring. In the spring, we ended up where we didn't actually have to report what we did. We had to do logs, but in case they required it, but then they ended up not requiring it. Well, now school's in session, no matter if we're remote or we're at school or anything in between. And so we have an obligation at the federal level and at the state level to report what we do with kids, not just what's on the IEP, but what we do. And so we're going to have those contingency plans that will tell us what will happen in each phase for each kid, but we need to know when that kid is in a certain phase. And so when you guys have a kid that moves from on-site to remote, we need to know. We did think about putting it as a paid or a form in the IEP, but we felt like that was you'd have to go do that for each individual kid. Instead, we just ask when a kid moves between a phase, whether it's because that one kid had to quarantine for 14 days, that kid is a part of a class that had to quarantine, or that kid, the entire building quarantined. Let us know the student name, the date that it started, and that'll be enough to help us, because everything else will be documented in the plans already. But we figured if you've got 10 kids, instead of having to go and fill out 10 different forms, just shoot us an email with all 10 kids, and that's good. Like, we don't need to duplicate a bunch of stuff. And we'll keep track of that on our end of who was in phase what at what time, so we can report accurately. So again, if you can just make sure you let me, Lindy, and Karen know, that'll help us out on our end to make sure we're reporting accurately. Let's see, that's it for that one. Looking at the numbers around Parent Choice Remote, it is pretty, we don't have a ton of numbers. I can't remember exactly what La Crosse was at, but Victoria and TMP and Ellis, from my understanding, have 0 at this point, or at least when we filled this out. La Crosse, there are a couple, but I know that's still in flux. And I know even at Hayes Middle and Hayes High School, every day these numbers kind of shift. You know, like somebody that we thought was going to be remote decides to come back, and vice versa. So, or we learn of a new enrollee who chose one or the other. So these numbers are just to kind of give you perspective of what it looks like. The reality is, when we're talking about caseloads, it's going to be really hard for us to break up a case. Like, ideally, we would have enough kids that we could have one person that we could pull out and really focus on, like their only focus is on parent choice remote. And then everybody else absorbs the rest of whatever their caseload was. But the way that they're spread across the district, there's really, or the co-op, there's really not a great person to be able to pull that from without it causing a whole bunch of disruption. Like if we were to pull Kim Schmeidler out of Hayes Middle School, that's a whole lot of kids that are on site that we have to figure out where are they going to assign. And so, and it's, we certainly wouldn't assign them to somebody in another building, because that's not going to make any more sense either. So we are going to, as of now, it's looking like we're going to have where you're at least case manager for people on site and remote. If we can come up with any solutions that get around that, I am all for it, because I don't want it to be that way if we can help it, but I just don't see a path to that right now. What that also means, though, is services are going to be a whole lot harder to provide in both settings. Case management kind of is about the same, because it's still the IEP, it's still that kind of stuff, but the services are where we're going to run into problems. The one thing I want you guys to remember is, in the remote plan and in the hybrid plan, and the remote plan I guess applies mostly right here, but in those plans, we don't have to replicate the exact service that kids are getting. It might make sense to, but it doesn't have to be. If they usually are going to have a full block of reading instruction, again, some of this is going to depend on how your school is doing, like the parent choice remote. Like at Hayes High School, for most of the classes, the kids are just going to be parallel with the classroom. They're going to zoom into, Algebra 2, and they're just going to be in Algebra 2. They're just going to be doing it from home. How we support that might still look, we might have a pair that gets on Zoom with them while they're in the class as well. They might be in that Zoom chat with them and be able to support them that way. Or maybe they don't need the support at all because they're at home, and the support they needed is a different support. Like maybe they needed help with focus. Well, how does that look? Maybe it can still happen through Zoom, but maybe not. I mean, I might still need it, but we might need to address it in a different way than with a para. All that to say, when you're writing out those remote plans, we have to keep in mind our other services and our caseload as a whole, because we know that remote and hybrid are not going to be exactly everything we want to provide this kid. It's going to get us closer to our priorities of our IEP goals and access to the curriculum, the general ed curriculum in particular, but it doesn't mean we have to replicate it exactly like it was in school. And that's where I think, if we try to do everything, we just don't have enough time. We have to be reasonable. We have to think about how we can change things to make it more reasonable for that kid. So at the high school and middle school, that definitely gets more confusing because of block schedules, and you're kind of stuck to the schedule. As an elementary, you can move when kids come to what a whole lot easier than you can in a block schedule, or even in a typical 7 or 8 period schedule. But they might still have learning expectations, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily carrying it out face to face with them the entire time. It might be, hey, I'm going to get on for 20 minutes, give you this, and then you're going to go do it, and then tomorrow we'll check in and see how you did, and we'll reassess. There's a ton of pros and cons to that. You get to stay with your same kids, but we know that the service is going to be much, much harder. Are there any extra thoughts or concerns about that? I know that Gen Ed at both Hayes Middle and Hayes High School are having the same conversation of how do we support those kids that are online while I'm also teaching in class. Some of that's going to be a Gen Ed solution as much as a special ed solution. So as you learn different ways, as you figure something out, if you're like, hey, I got this great idea, share it. We want to, I'm in the learning mode as much as anybody, and I'm very interested in any solution and seeing how we can make it work. So okay. Moving on from caseload, for those that we sent out the guidance document, this how special ed is going to look in phased learning. I sent that on through email and everything. I hope everybody's had a chance to look at it. That was created with the voices of our co-op leadership team with staff across the co-op. They helped create the draft, and then I sent the draft to everybody, paras, every certified staff we had, administrators, and about 30 parents, groups of parents, 30 sets of parents, the parents of 30 kids, we'll say. I don't know. There were probably 45 parents that looked at it. And then we came up with the guidance off of all that input. And so on this page on the website, we have the plan saved. We have a parent summary and a staff summary because each one is going to focus on a little bit different pieces of the plan. So we wanted to be able to show a one-pager for each of you. And then a staff frequently asked questions, which goes into a bunch of different scenarios and stuff that it really didn't make sense to put those scenarios in the actual plan, but we wanted to make sure people could see those questions and know that we have thought about that stuff. And then there's resources. There's not a lot there because it's still from the continuous learning, but there will be more probably tomorrow. I was hoping to do it yesterday, and you know, I'm sure everybody's in the same boat. Time goes a lot faster right now, and so you think you can do everything and just can't. But we do the best we can. But as you have questions about what do we need to do? What does special ed look like? That can go here. I'm going to also put the guidance document for the contingency plans right here. And so anything around this, you'll have it sent to you, and you'll have it in the folder, in this folder. But you can also come and find it here if you don't know where it's at otherwise. So again, if there's anything else that would be helpful on these pages or anywhere on the website, let me know, because we want that to be useful to you. Like, it can look great and we can put all the fancy stuff on it, but if it's not being used and it's not helping you, that's not the intent. So it's got to be helpful for you. Okay, going into more instructional things. Some of this is stuff that your gen ed admin are probably sharing as well. Early in the year, incorporate those, for those on-site people, incorporate elements of remote learning so that kids are starting to get familiar with those processes. It doesn't mean you have to do everything remote, but if it's something you're going to try and use during remote, try and get them familiar with it now. If you're going to use IXL a lot, get them into and at least navigate around IXL. If you're going to use Canvas or Seesaw or whatever else, make sure that you're getting them in and so they know where to find the key stuff. It's just like orienting them to your classroom. You know, this is where we keep the paper. This is where you turn in assignments. Get them oriented to that stuff as well and get them some practice with it. It's going to be really vital if we do switch. Even if it's one student or 20, it's going to be important that they know what to do. It's going to save you a lot of time on the back end. The other thing, this doesn't apply to us as much because our schedules are dictated. Our services start the first day because they have first hour and I'm first hour teacher. And so, you know, that isn't as big of a deal. But when it comes to related providers, we're sharing the same information. Services really have to start early. We had one provider, I think last year, that didn't want to start or had told their teams that services weren't going to start until after Labor Day. That's not okay. That's never okay. And it's definitely not okay now because we don't know what after Labor Day, if we'll even have the kids in our building. We hope we do. But we can't take any time for granted with our kids. Everything face-to-face, we got to try and get it as much as we can. So I'm telling them that, Lindy right now is telling them, aim to start by the first full week of school. Like, so everybody starts either the 26th or the 27th. So those services should be starting the next week. There's definitely reasons why. You know, sometimes gen ed knows, or resource knows as well as any. Sometimes the schedules and other things that you need to get your services started, sometimes those are hard to get, especially those that have worked in elementary schools. You know, your one schedule, if you don't have all of the schedules, it's really hard to make anything work. But from a services perspective, we just have to get it off the ground right away. Some of the things that we are making available, we are getting some different resources to help parents and paras and students be able to use the different programs that we're going to be using, IXL, Seesaw, etc., but also helping some kids, especially our life skills kids, but any kids that need more structures, creating some visuals and charts and different things, different materials that we can communicate, some social stories, for example, that we can help kids with the transition between on-site and remote and back and forth and all of that. So, and the intent is that for a lot of these visuals, if they're being used at school, they're being used at home. And so it's the same thing. And resource. There may not be as many kids, but I wanted you guys to know that these are available, and we'll be sharing them because there are some kids that it definitely still makes sense to use. So, okay. All right. Another consideration, this is still talking about on-site learning with your schedules, and the schedule side of it, it probably isn't as critical for you guys as it was the elementary. Even actually all of this stuff is probably more, because your schedule is pretty much dictated to you. Your groupings are dictated to you. So this probably isn't as big of a deal. But maybe thinking about if you do have like a study skills kind of a class where kids are coming in, think about the groupings during those study skills. If you have choice in when that study skills can be, if it's kids that are already grouped together somewhere else, that's going to be better than all of a sudden a new group during a class that was unnecessary. Sometimes it's going to be necessary just because there's only so many hours, but consider how kids are being grouped, because the fewer contacts a kid has during the day, the less chance that they'll have to be quarantined. Because, you know, if Johnny gets quarantined and he's been he didn't need to be in this group with Sally. Well, now Sally could have avoided a quarantine that now she is a part of. So, are there any safety precautions in the secondary level? Because again, as I was writing, I was thinking about it as just everybody in general, but as I'm presenting, definitely doesn't apply completely to everybody. Any of the safety precautions at the secondary level that would change what you think about your service or how you're providing? What are your thoughts?
I have a question, Kyle.
Yes, Myra.
Say we have a student who does come down with the COVID virus. I know as the high school teachers are, do we just, like, what do we do with their, I mean, I would not expect them to try to do homework while they're sick.
Right.
What do we tell their teachers? I mean, our expectations would be for them to not worry about their assignments and get well, or?
I would treat it like any other sick day at that point. What's the expectation? You know, if it's, you know, the days that they're sick, maybe not, but if they get better, but they still have to quarantine, we might then increase the expectations during those days. But it just depends on how you usually handle, like if a kid was out 3 days for sickness, what would you usually do? Would you hold everything?
Okay. Would
you send some stuff home? Would you say, hey, here on Canvas or whatever learning platform you might use, hey, here's this stuff to use? I think if they're actually sick, I think you have to hold them. You do it the same way with any other illness. I don't feel like COVID has to be treated differently. If they're home and they're not really sick, you know, they're on quarantine, then we're still doing the remote learning and they still have obligations to learn in most cases. Of course, there's going to be individual scenarios where that expectation might shift, but for the most part, it's the same.
So if they're just quarantined, they could still do their work. Just
I would think so, unless parents are saying, hey, because of how we have to quarantine in our house, like the computer's in this room and we can't get it, you know, it's hardwired in and we can't, like for this kid to quarantine in his room, county health is saying, like there might be some scenarios not, but.
Okay, so, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other thoughts around the instructional side, how health or safety precautions might affect you? I know that I went to Tara Herman's room in lacrosse, and like the space issue is quite, when you try and do 6 feet in between in these classrooms, that you just see the challenges that everybody's going to be facing. So, okay. All right. We do also have some mask resources for how to teach kids how to use masks. This probably applies more for younger kids, but there might even be some kids that, especially at the junior high level, where this still is appropriate. Social narratives for masks, family resources around masks. Each school district is going to have their own exemption policy. If you're in Hayes, your nurse or school nurse is going to go over that process with you at in-service. For those in outlying districts, I'm not sure, but make sure you check with your admin of what does that look like. Because there are reasons why students may not have to wear masks. Each place is kind of handling it a little bit different. Most, I think, have some type of a form that doctors have to sign, but then how they're identifying that, how they're communicating that through their staff, that might be different. So, okay. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. Seeing nods. Okay. All right. So some discussion. Let me see how much we have here. Okay. I wanted to kind of get your guys' input around in your district, or in your building, if there have been any discussions I know like at Hayes High, the way that they're kind of doing parallel, at Hayes Middle School, they're kind of doing a parallel, like where they're zooming in with kids. What will your services look like, and what will your partnerships with general education need to look like? And then as a part of that, what kind of supports could we provide in that collaboration, that partnership? In either of the, as you move between settings, but on-site, remote, parent choice remote, what are some thoughts you guys have around services and partnerships? Bueller? No. Do we have any young people that don't know what Bueller is? Yeah, probably. Like Karen Wassinger, she doesn't know what Bueller means. No, okay. As you are thinking about services, as you are having discussions with your school teams, as you're needing supports around partnerships with general education, we've already tried to communicate through our guidance and with principals about how gen ed really needs to kind of be, especially when it comes to our support in those gen ed classrooms, not necessarily the classes we have control over, but in those gen ed classrooms of really understanding the purpose of special education. And yes, at the secondary level, when credits and graduation are at play, our perspective does change a little bit compared to elementary, but we still are about skill building and getting kids to where they can be more independent in the general ed curriculum. And so what are ways that we can do that? How can we modify work? How can we modify assessments to make sure that they're accessing it without the need for an extra person in the room if possible? And I know it's going to be a change, but I think it's also an important change for our schools in general. Like, our goal should always be to try and have kids in gen ed more. And I know that sometimes the barrier to that is that it's easier for gen ed if they're not there. Sometimes it's easier for us if they're not there because of how much support we have to provide, and there's definitely consideration for that. But sometimes I think we kind of cheat kids out of some of that extra time with their peers, or those, just because they can't learn the material exactly as it is doesn't mean we can't modify it and have some parallel curriculum alongside. And so there's a lot of stuff out there around inclusion. I'm not one for inclusion for the sake of inclusion, but I am one for finding meaningful inclusion even in places where we don't normally see it. And so I think there's some places we can grow with that. And as you guys are learning and find people that will partner with you, and you find things that are working, please share those out, because we want to make sure that, hey, this is something we tried and it's really going well. We want to be able to share that with people, because right now everybody's in a learning experience, and it's going to be important for us to build upon that. So, okay. The next discussion is around paras. Last year during continuous learning, everything shut down, and one of the requirements for the hourly waiver was that we continue paying paras. We had permission to pay paras and pay everybody for hours that weren't worked. This year, we don't have that clarity of guidance. And so while we're working around that, still trying to define exactly what that means, it does also mean we need to have some expectations for paras, even if we go to a remote setting. And of course, if they're at home and they have to watch their kids and do, like, there's definitely going to be some variance within this, but we still have expectations for kids to be educated and to be participating, and our paras can support that. We are looking at different ways to get devices. Device orders right now are very difficult, and so trying to figure out how we can support that. But we're definitely wanting to expand on what the paras can do during remote and during hybrid. What are some things that you guys found useful or would have been useful if you could have used your paras for? And some of it last year in continuous learning, some of it can be for the exact service you're providing during that phase, or it might be getting prepared for when you come back to on-site or as we're shifting between. Like, it doesn't have to be directly related to Johnny needs this service, the para can zoom in with them. That's definitely a part of it, but don't limit yourself to that. What are other things that paras could be, that we could use paras for, tap them for?
Kyle, will we need to have a para if we're zooming with our class? If we go to remote, they'll need to be in with us on Zoom, right?
That's a great question. I got clarity from Ron Wilson. So each of you in the outlying districts, make sure you check with your administrator to see how they're comfortable with this. But the Hayes policy around 2 people being on Zoom, they aren't, because based on the experiences we had last year and the the difficulty that it was going to be to have 2 people on at one time. They're not requiring 2 people to be on for all sessions, but if you have a parent or you have a situation that you're like, hey, I want 2 people on this, it is definitely okay for you to do that. There's a parent that one of our life skills teachers, she had contacted me about a parent that was being belligerent and rude on a session. If that's happening, definitely okay to have 2 people on it. If you're having struggles finding somebody, I'll be that second person if we need to. I'm definitely we'll make it work. But Ron didn't want to say that was a have to, but it's definitely it's definitely allowed, and definitely situations where maybe I'd consider it. But for the average session, they didn't think that was going to be necessary. So, if that makes sense. But then for those of you in outlying districts, Ron doesn't make that call. I'm comfortable with that decision from his point of view, but definitely check with your local administrator on what that looks like for you. So, perfect, Amy. Daily schedules for paras. Thank you, Kim. Or they would Zoom. Amy, I'm not sure what last year looked like, but in my previous district, paras would meet with their students over Zoom and work specifically on IEP goals. Great way to use them. We'll capture this. I instructed my paras to touch base with students. Perfect. One thing to clarify also that Ron was comfortable with, and I think this would apply. This will definitely apply across all of our districts. For the learning logs and for those in remote learning, they have to have a parent or a teacher contact once a day. It doesn't have to be a specific teacher, but they have to have at least one teacher contact them every day. In special education, all para service is technically an extension of you or of the teacher. And so we are defining a para contact as a teacher contact as well. So if you guys are coordinating that, the one caveat to that is I don't want the para to be the only one that ever contacts that parent or that student for a long period of time. It's just like, I also don't want to make sure that parents understand that is when they're filling out a log and like, it wasn't a teacher, it was a para that was with us. Help them understand that it was actually like that para is providing the teacher instruction and they are an extension of you. If they're concerned, they will get back to you and it will be addressed. But it is allowed. That was a big question that people were having because especially around special ed remote, like how, if a teacher has to do it, how do we do that? Especially in our life skills programs. Okay. All right, as you think of other things that we can use for paras, we are developing guidance for in the different phases, what paras will be allowed to do, what they should be doing and what they are allowed to do. So kind of requirements as well as allows, because the allows might change because normally we normally don't allow paras to help with lunch, for example, like lunch supervision, just because of the time that we have with them, we have to maximize it. But if we go to a remote setting and we need people to help provide, to serve lunch at the drive-ups, it would be okay for them to do that as long as they're not the only ones doing it. So there's different things that we can allow them to do at different points that might be different from normal. For resources, yes.
Just a question on paras. Is there any chance, just something to consider, any chance that a para could help cover like the teacher's 3 kids while the teacher's doing instruction?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't see any problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, good question. So we're trying to put together resources. We've compiled everything. We've ordered some health and safety features or health and safety products. We've got different learning platforms available. We've got Blue Ink. We've got a district level Blue Ink account. I'm working to get your guys's. If you have an account that was set up with your school email, I'm trying to get that linked to my account, just so that you don't have to create a new one and all the stuff that's already there you still have access to. We've got that so that we can continue using Blue Ink. Zoom right now is still free, so we're not going to do anything with it. But if it shifts to where it costs, we will shift to a pay model for Zoom, because between IEP meetings and services, we just can't not have that. So that's all kind of stuff that we're definitely getting. One other resources, either programs, safety, PPE kind of stuff, or just supports. Like, can you gather information? Can you do research on this and get it for us? Can you, like, anything like that that you guys think of would be helpful? Please let us know, because we want to be busy and we want to be supportive, but we also don't want to be working in the wrong direction. You guys are wanting something on this and we're working in this direction. Like, help us help you if there's certain things you want. And we also have some COVID related funds that are specifically for special education that they've gone to paying for some of the PPE stuff. They're helping pay for Blue Ink. Sorry, I got the hiccups. They're doing some of that kind of stuff. It's not as much as the district's got, but it's enough that we can do some things. But I also don't want to like spend a whole bunch of money on something that we end up not needing, because that's not going to help us either. So I want to make sure that it's focused and targeted and helping as many people as we can. Okay. All right. As you think of stuff, also, if you're wanting to talk more about like services, what does that even look like? There weren't a lot of questions, but there also weren't a lot of answers when we were talking about services. Lindy is you know, she's offered her expertise and her knowledge to be able to help talk through what can service look like at both the on-site and the remote and hybrid learning, and figure out what are we needing, and even if we need to get through, we bring 3 or 4 people together and talk it through and brainstorm. That's the kind of stuff we're interested in. So reach out to us. We'll be happy to get stuff set up to support that. Okay. And then lesson plans. This says 2 weeks of lesson plans. And the reason we would like you to have 2 weeks of lesson plans prepared is in case we have a sudden shift to remote, or there's a sudden need for long-term sub. That way it's not a set, you know, somebody's having to scramble and figure out how we're going to teach this kid or teach these kids in a short amount of time. Time is going to be precious with this. The reason it's 2 weeks though is because Randy Watson suggested 8 weeks, and I thought 8 weeks was ridiculous. So I felt like 2 weeks, and talking with some teachers, 2 weeks felt doable. It's definitely, you know, a lot of teachers already said they have 2 weeks of prep already kind of in place or ready to go, especially for those times. You know, it doesn't mean that it's like the extension of the current unit you're on, but what if somebody had to step in, a sub had to step in, what could be meaningful activities for those kids to carry out or to work on. So that we'll work through that. Next are contingency plans, and contingency plans, again, these are going to be added to the IEP. We will be doing amendments. The timeline for these right now, one, because we are in school, if a kid is remote, that's a change of placement if we don't have it in the IEP as the contingency plan. So within 10 school days, if they go remote, we have to be within 10 school days, we have to have that contingency plan in place, or else we're out of compliance. So that's why we have the 10 school days rule there. So if we know a kid is in parent choice remote, school starts on the 26th, we need to have it done 10 days from the 26th. The September 11th date is out there for those online, or for those kids that are starting on site, because I don't want us to get down the road and kind of forget about them, and all of a sudden everybody goes remote, and now we have 10 days to do 30 of them instead, or 20 of them instead of 10 days to do, or 1 or 2. And so September 11th, it's kind of like with the ICLPs last year. We put a date out there as kind of this soft due date. Really strive to hit that date as you can, but I know there's going to be barriers. The start of the year is going to be crazy. There's going to be a lot going on. Again, soft date. We'll check in with you guys. Hey, what do you need? And what is there a parent we can help contact, whatever's going on to affect that. Because we just don't want to get to where, okay, it's 10 days and now we have to get these done or else we're out of compliance, which can cause a whole lot of other problems. So that's the due dates. Try to be really reasonable about it, but I know that it's going to cause some pressure. And so I want to, that being a soft due date is definitely meant to be kind of a soft pressure or like a release valve. If you're really scrambling, you're like, I'm not going to get there, please communicate. We're going to have grace around that, but I think it'll be important to get it sooner than later. So with contingency plans, it is 2 different plans. They look exactly, or almost not exactly, a lot like the ICLPs, but it's 2 plans. There's a hybrid plan for when that kid might be at school some and at home some, and then a remote plan where they might be at home or they will be at home the entire time. Each one has 3 or 4 sections. I'm just going to show you the contingency, this is the guidance document that's in the folder. And I'm going to do this just because it has some visuals that I didn't get added to the slideshow. It's basically the same information, just has some visuals with it. So these sections, very similar to the ICLPs. The service section looks just like everything else, like it did on the ICLP. You have what service, the setting, the subject or the class. And this is one place on that subject or class, because there wasn't a great place to put this information. You can put what subject or class, but how is it going to be provided during the hybrid? On the remote, we know everything's going to be remote, but if something is hybrid, what's happening? So speech is going to be through Zoom, but math is going to be, the student will come to the school 30 minutes, 1 day per week. And so again, it can be 1 day, it can be 5 days, whatever works for the schedule and what you're needing. So, but this looks exactly like any other service list that we have. You have to include the minutes, how many days per week, and the frequency. Okay. And we'll have examples of all of this stuff, but as we're thinking about the services in this section, we need to think about the individual needs of the student, of course. We have to think about the general education plans for hybrid and remote learning. What we offer is in context of what they would get in the general ed plan. We don't have to try and get them everything they got in the typical learning if they're not in typical learning, or in on-site learning. But what would gen ed look like? What are other school policies that might affect that? Maybe your school is saying, if we are remote, nobody's coming to school. Well, that changes what we can offer as hybrid, definitely. But I don't know of any that are that way, but if there is a school policy that changes something of what we could offer, that has to be a part of it. And then caseloads and your schedules. Again, we're not gonna be able to do everything on the IEP on the contingency plans. We'll try and do the best we can, but we have to prioritize and communicate with parents about why we're prioritizing those things over other things. So, okay. One thing is about service codes. Last year, we switched everything to like home-based and consult and all this stuff. Consult is still there, but the service code or the setting code, whether it's a G or a C, that is in context to what the general ed is doing. So if there are, parent choice remote in Hayes is they're zooming into the class, they're algebra 2, they're zooming into algebra 2, and there's a pair that's going to be supporting them while they're in algebra 2. That's still a C time. It's not A, it's not anything. It's still going to be a lot of C and G times. If you have questions about that, let me know, but generally we're thinking of what does general education look like to that kid right now? And general education for parent choice remote is Edgenuity or whatever else they might be doing, or zooming in through using Canvas as well. And we'll have more guidance on that as we go. Other considerations, this box is right underneath services, and this is where you put if a service isn't happening on the IEP. Like for this case, Dory typically receives OT service, but the team felt that the service could be discontinued during hybrid learning. They will resume when Dory returns to on-site learning. So that's just saying OT is not happening during this phase. And again, there's a considerations for hybrid and a considerations for remote. This is also where any other things that might change, the behavior plan, let's see, healthcare plans, any other aspects of the IEP not addressed somewhere else on this document. After that, we have the accommodations, modifications, and supplementary aids. This is just like we did last year on the ICLPs. What are they needing during this phase? So if they still need text reader, we'll add text reader. If we need to add transportation, they don't normally have transportation, but we're adding it to get them to the hybrid sessions, add it here. If you are adding transportation, please communicate with us first. Not that we'll say no necessarily, but we need to be able to make sure that it's still going to work for Russ, and that you understand, like, if just because we add transportation, that might mean we have to adjust these services or the actual schedule that kid is there, because Russ is only going to have so many buses to drive people from one place to the next. we need to work around what that looks like. But it's definitely, just because they don't have transportation now doesn't mean they may not qualify for it during a hybrid service. Of course, remote wouldn't have transportation because nobody's coming to school, or that kid's not coming to school. And again, you just fill it out the same way you do any accommodation, modification, or supplementary aid. What is it? What's the frequency? What's the location? And how long is it going to happen? And then the last section is the least restrictive environment. How does this plan in hybrid, how does it impact their participation in the general ed curriculum and the general ed activities for that phase? So, you know, if nobody else is accessing sports, they aren't either. And that's not a consideration we have to put here. But if everybody's on Edgenuity, but this kid's actually not going to do Edgenuity, we'd put that here. And then again, we do that for hybrid, and we do that for remote. And then there's a prior written notice. I haven't been able to get the guidance completely, like the sample form filled out for this yet. But the general thing around the prior written notice is, as you're doing the amendment, you might have some other things you're changing. Kids new to middle school, and the IEP didn't get adjusted to the new schedule, or your school has a different schedule than it did last year. We're going to do, you might do that amendment. You'll have section in the box, you might describe how the IEP is going to change on the amendment, and then you'll have a section for the hybrid and a section for the remote that'll be worded as such. If student is moved to hybrid phase, we will provide, and then you outline the services and the accommodations and anything that's happening in that plan or in that phase. And then we do the same thing for remote. And again, I'll have some examples, but the reason we have to put that here and make sure that it's clear is so that, because if it's not included on that prior written notice and the parent doesn't sign consent, then when we do make the change, we have to get it signed and we have to do the prior written notice then. We want to avoid having to do anything twice. And so we'll write these really clear and really detailed. And if you want me to look at one before you do it, before you send it, definitely let me know. I'd be happy to do that. Because the first time we do something, especially if it's a brand new process for it, we always kind of question it. And then we find one that that's a good example. And then we just use that as our example forever. Like, I don't know, that's how I was a school psych. I know a lot of teachers that way too. So, let me know. I'd be happy to look at it and see if it's worded in such a way to process that. But we have to put that, make sure that we don't have to do multiple things down the line. One thing we might have to do down the road, like if we do switch phases, we might have to send a prior written notice saying we are actually changing phases, but we wouldn't have to have that one signed. And it'll be a copy and paste of, or like a copy and paste where you just add in a little bit of detail specific to that student. But it would be a pretty generic looking thing. So that way we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Again, if we're switching phases, we don't want to be spending time on paperwork more than we have to. So around contingency learning plans or contingency plans, I'm sorry, I'm trying to not include, I'm trying to make it where it's not confusing with the ICLPs. So, but we did come up with a checklist for people that are just like, I don't even know where to start. I didn't do this last year, or this feels different than last year. So I've made a checklist. If you are working through the checklist and you're like, hey, when I added this step, it made things easier. Let us know. This is a learning process. We'll add the step and share it with everybody else, because we want to make sure that this is actually helpful. Like, this is kind of in our mind, like in the process, what we do, because nobody's done this before. And so in this process, what do we need to do to make it work? And so we kind of tried to come up with that. If you have anything else, please let me know. Talked about prior written notice, evaluations and reevaluations. Went over this with school psychs this morning, but for the most part, in most cases when we're remote, kids will still be able to come in person for small sessions. And so that's where we can still do those evals. If we do get to a point where kids can't come in at all, that's where we might have to look at delaying or look at alternative assessment options. Even with the safety precautions, we might want to look at alternative assessment options. We do have some dividers and stuff to help with testing kids when you're close proximity. But if there's really think about what questions we're trying to answer and what assessments can get us those answers. If there's assessments that would work, that don't require close contact, let's lean towards those if we can. So, all right, and then secondary resource. The last thing I want to talk about, I know it's right now at 1. I hate ending after the time that have promised, but I also want to make sure this is shared. So I apologize if you do have something else, let me know. But around FastBridge, last year we were trialing M-Class Dibbles, which was an online administered Dibbles that allowed for online scoring and everything. That was K6 for reading. Well, we were looking at it for adding math. Math only went up to K3, which made it even more limiting for us. And the price jumped up astronomically. And so we looked at some alternatives. We landed on FastBridge. FastBridge has reading and math, covers K-12, still has the screening, progress monitoring, online administration, online data keeping, and then it's also about a third of the price of the other one. And so it was a no-brainer. I really did not want to change this now, but it was a matter of the cost and everything else. So we're not expecting everybody to use this ever, but we're letting people know that it's here. We do have, if you wrote goals using M-Class, we still have access to paper Dibbles and we can use that, or you can use the other reading probes that are similar to Dibbles and just acknowledge on the progress report that, hey, we switched from Dibbles to this measure. It's the same type of measure, but the score is this. And so that way they kind of understand that it might need to be interpreted a little different. But FastBridge, we're going to start with our M-Class people and let them be the first ones to kind of trial and get trained up on it. We'll have some information sent out here soon about how to access like the online trainings that are doing. We're not going to organize a staff training in person or a formal training at this point until a little ways down the line, just because it's not a super priority for us, and I don't think it is for you guys either. Some of you might feel like it's stronger, or it definitely is, and that's where we want to make sure it's available. And so you can, if you're eager and you want to, here's how you can get into it. But if you want to wait, you can definitely wait. We're going to start with those M-Class group, and then anybody else that really wants to start with it, and then we'll kind of build from there. But this is definitely, like, I wanted you guys to know about it so you knew it was here, and that way you're like, hey, I think this would really help me with something I'm doing. How do I get into it? We'd definitely be able to help support you individually or as small groups, but we also don't want you to feel like, hey, this is too much. I can't handle this. That's not the intention here. Just wanted to make sure you knew what it was. So, and then anything else, I'll definitely send an example. Julie, if a student has C service but watches a recording of the inclusion class, but para is checking in with the student at another time of day, would it still be considered C time? Probably not. That feels like a G because it's a separate time from when he's with his peers. Does that make sense? Okay. But if you were to classify it as a C, I could be talked into it because it's about the same class. So yes. Yes and no. It's not super clear. I would probably lean towards a G in that specific scenario. If there's a likelihood where sometimes it's going to be checked in at the same time and sometimes not, I would just go with C, but it really doesn't. Yeah. I don't, either time, as long as the time is accurate and how it's described, parents understand how it'll go, I'm fine with either way. So, okay. Any other questions, concerns? I have about 5 minutes before I have to jump off and get in with gifted. So.
Hey, Kyle. Sorry about feedback. Where can we find that contingency plan checklist that you showed? I couldn't find it in the documents.
Yes, I added it last night to the Word. Ooh, there we go. I'm gonna mute you. There we go. I added it last night in the Word document, and I thought I saved it in the PDF. So I'm gonna go save it to the PDF right now, and it should be added there. So, so 10 minutes and it'll be there. So, and all these slides will also be added to the folders at the end of the day as well. So, okay. Any other questions, concerns, comments, funny jokes? No? All right. Well, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. This year is incredibly different and there's a lot of challenges, but I also think we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn what works for our kids and what doesn't, and we're going to find things. Right now, because we're going to be in special ed, we're going to be so focused on really the core of what special education is, as opposed to not just what we can do, which sometimes what we can do ends up, we do it because it makes it easier for some other people. And I think now it gives us an opportunity to really see, what our kids can do and where can we, using Lindy's term of presuming competence, where can we presume, yeah, this kid can handle this. Let's try. Let's see if they can, or at least, and then we can adjust if we need to. The contingency plans, just like any other part of the IEP, if we get 3 weeks in and they aren't working, we can amend it and change it, just like anything else. And so we're not stuck in something, and I don't want people to feel like we are. And so we'll learn, we'll adjust. And the biggest thing this afternoon in my last session, I'm going to really emphasize the learning part. But if you learn something and you figure something out that works, please share, because we all are trying to solve the same problems. And if one of us figures it out, we got to share it and spread it across the board. Like, our goal right now is to have the greatest impact on the greatest number of kids. And yours right now is, at first, figuring out what works for one kid, and then we can expand it to other kids. And so all right. Well, I appreciate everything you guys do. I appreciate all of you. I hope that you guys are feeling supported. It feels like I am in a whirlwind as much as anybody else, I'm sure. But I'm trying to keep my focus on you guys and what you guys need. But like I said earlier, if there's something you need that we're not giving you, let me know, because it's not because we're not wanting to do it. It's because we don't know you need it. So, all right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate